Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy is sponsored by Thomson Reuters, providing legal professionals with the intelligence, technology, and human expertise they need to find trusted answers. Products include Westlaw, Practical Law, and Firm Central legal practice management software for small law firms. Thomson Reuters, the answer company. Online at thomsonreuters.com. Access to Democracy is made possible in part by a donation from Firefly Credit Union. Firefly is the new name of U.S. Federal Credit Union, which has proudly served the financial needs of the Greater Twin Cities community since 1925. At Firefly, we guide our members forward and give them the power to chase dreams by delivering the financial solutions they need to get ahead. From checking accounts to mortgages, we'll light the way. We are Firefly Credit Union, and this is Life Illuminated. And Dr. Charles Crutchfield of award-winning Crutchfield Dermatology in Eagan, acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. A Minnesota native who trained at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Crutchfield personally treats all patients and states that experience counts and quality matters. Crutchfield Dermatology. Look good, feel great, with beautiful skin.
And welcome, Access to Democracy, subtitle, The Dane Smith Show. And Dane returns once again. Always an interesting interview, always informative, always new information. You have so many things to talk about. Where do you want to start?
Well, I thought maybe we would talk about the 2016 legislature, which is
that'll be a short discussion.
Well underway. And, although expectations have been low and nobody expects too much out of this session, I really think there's some promising things underway. One is some legislation that we are supporting at Growth and Justice called Career Pathway, and it has to do with new models that are emerging in this state. Really, really impressive ways to get low-income young adults of color into the skills and credentials that they will need to lift their incomes and lift their families' fortunes. These models are thriving. We're doing a lot of storytelling around some success in these models. There's legislation that would put millions of dollars into this, in addition to what we need to do for funding for higher education. And we really think that this is promising. There's also on
does it look like it's going to make it?
Yes, I think that's going to make it. Partly because Growth and Justice and the advocates for this are building support in the business community and with Republicans and outstate and metro area legislators who see the value of this. The biggest problem facing Minnesota in the very near future is rising inequality between the top, the bottom, and the middle, racial disparity, and simultaneously the demographic crunch with people our age. Alan, with all due respect,
there is nobody my age. We know that.
We're over the hill, and we need to retire, and our semi-skilled professions need to be filled with qualified people. That's where we have to marshal our resources, and Career Pathways is just one way to do that. We need to bring everything we have to bear, invest more in our human potential. Business knows this. They're hurting for skilled labor from border to border, and we need to fill that need. And at the same time, I mean, these problems are made for each other. At the same time, we need to reduce these racial disparities. They'll kill us if we don't get after it right away.
Well, racial inequality not only here, but all over the country, we have seen the devastating effects of it.
Yes, absolutely. Minnesota actually has some of the worst disparities. It's worse than other states, not so much because African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and Native Americans are doing all that much worse here, but partly because Minnesota was, until a couple decades ago, overwhelmingly a white state, and our white population, because of our progressive history, was doing much better than the white populations in every other state. And then we have newcomers now who need to be part of this Minnesota success story, but their disparity right now is glaring, and we need to make sure that all Minnesotans benefit from that heritage we have of relative equality.
Helping young people to get on a right path, a path where they get an education and they get training for something in the future. I mean, you can't even compare that to where we are with 2 million people in jail,
Right.
probably half of whom are in there for nonviolent crimes and shouldn't
Right.
be in there to begin with. And until we right that wrong, we are just treading water, but we're not moving forward.
Right. Mass incarceration is one of our nation's biggest problems. It's a little less serious in Minnesota. We actually have not quite, we're on the low end of states in terms of the percentage of population that's actually behind bars. But we are actually pretty high in the percentage who are in the penal system on probation and so forth. And we need to restore their rights. We need to rewrite laws so that we're treating drug possession and drug dealing more as a health problem than as a capital crime or a felony, and we need to work at that.
And the expense is tremendous.
Yes, it is.
That we have to expend so much of our budget in this area rather than make it
Right.
into something productive.
Well, it's been remarked over and over or it's been noted that the annual cost of imprisonment is about the same as education at Harvard, $50,000 a year. And if we had put all of that money that we're putting into imprisonment into early childhood, if we had made sure that parents were rewarded for their work, if we had taken that money and brought it into investing in human capital earlier and avoid the imprisonment, just think how much better off we would be. That's really investment.
One thing that troubles me also is private prisons. I think that I just don't see where a prison should be a profit-making venture. And I think that's one of the things that we are starting to see across the country, is that these private prisons are not working.
Right.
We managed very well with public schools, public prisons, and et cetera.
Yeah. There are a number of things that the private sector does better, clearly. And they probably always will and should do. Manufacturing most goods.
Absolutely.
Let's say the airline industry. Most forms of commerce, communications, private sector, clearly. But some things the public sector actually does better. Transportation. We don't have competing highways, 16 competing highways running from here to St. Cloud for a reason. It makes sense for one entity, our own governments, to do certain things, and they do it with more efficiency. And transportation is one. Healthcare financing is
We'll
another.
go back to Eisenhower with transportation and see
Right.
what great strides we made then, but we certainly are in big trouble now in
Right.
terms of a crumbling infrastructure.
Right.
Healthcare is another one.
Healthcare is another one where public sectors in other nations hold down costs and have better health results from a centralized form of financing of healthcare. And then, of course, you just mentioned the the justice system clearly ought to
Public
be on the
safety
public.
and justice,
Public safety
absolutely.
and justice belongs in the public sector. All kinds of bad things have happened with these private prisons. Really, really horror stories. And we also know that the public sector generally does a better job on education. Most colleges are either private and not-for-profit, which is important. Harvard's, the Yales, all the
Yes.
private colleges are actually not-for-profit. But we've seen some real horror stories out of these for-profit education universities.
Especially the ones that have been online.
Right.
And that's a story that's still not completed, but it has been very frightening.
Yes.
You don't believe me? Ask the people who went to Trump University.
Yeah, exactly. It's just one example. So we know that the public sector does some things very well. And of course, we need oversight. We need a good, free press that exposes government failure. But we always need to be aware that in general, the public sector is invaluable. It's vulnerable. It's always open to the attack that it's inefficient and we can do without it, and that if we just cut taxes and reduce government to what did Grover Norquist say, small enough to drown in a bathtub, that
right.
will all be better. It's just simply the facts don't bear that out.
Actually,
Cutting
Grover
taxes.
Norquist is small enough that we could drown him in a bathtub, but I don't
suppose.
propose that, but
Actually, haven't heard
It's a
much
thought.
from him lately.
no, we haven't.
But we have heard lately there's a new report out by the Center of the American Experiment that suggests that our taxes are too high in Minnesota, especially on wealthy people, and that they are fleeing in great numbers to Florida and Texas and Arizona.
But there have been some statistical studies of that, have there not?
Yes, we have engaged on this respectfully with the Center of the American Experiment. I was on Almanac TPT show recently with a conversation about this with their executive director, and we pointed out that even though Minnesota does have higher income taxes at the very top rates than most states, that our state's business climate is just excellent. Report after report shows good job growth, good job creation, startups, you name it. Minnesota is doing really well. We were
Also-
recently ranked by Gallup in the number one in the nation for job creation.
You have some statistics in that regard that we're going to talk about in a second. But also, in terms of not only job growth, but as the quality of life here
Right.
is understandably so good that it really, it's one of the surprises for an 18-year Minnesotan, but you couldn't get us to move anyplace else because of the quality of life here,
Right.
because of what's really
Right.
advantageous here, because of literature, because of theater, because of all the intellectual things, the library system, etc.
Exactly. Good colleges, universities, hospitals, roads, parks and recreation. We're one of the best
Absolutely.
states in the country in parks and recreation. All these amenities create an attractive place to live, which we have to do to compete with those southern states, because it's 20 below here in the middle of January, and it's 70 degrees in South Florida. If we cut our taxes to the rock bottom levels that they have, and if we have the weak economic security provisions, the low levels of investment, the high levels of inequality and disparity that they have, then we'll just and we're still cold. What do we got left?
Will be another statistic.
The last thing we want to be is a cold Florida. In other words, having their socioeconomic indicators and still being cold.
Although with another decade
Yes,
of global warming, we may be the next Florida.
which is not a good thing, but it might work that way for us.
But you've had a list of some of the things
Yeah, actually,
that really has rated Minnesota so high. And another thing we have to talk about, we have probably more Fortune 500 companies per capita than any other state, perhaps, than Delaware.
For 30 years, we've been hearing that our high taxes, our inheritance taxes, we're one of the few states that actually expects inherited wealth to pay a little bit back into the community that
Or as
that
my
created that
Republican
wealth.
guests will say, death taxes.
Death tax rate. I like to call it unearned income tax, because if there's any form of income that is not deserved, it is the inheritance.
That's for sure.
Income. But just a quick list of the rankings on that have come out just in the last couple of years on business health. A Gallup survey ranked us best in job creation. CNBC, ranked in a widely disseminated report, had us number 1 for business, best state for business, period. And they went on and on about how Minnesota has this distinctive way of being good for business, even though we are a high-tax state. They acknowledged that and spelled it out, and said that we had distinguished ourselves so well on quality of life indicators and the other things that attract businesses that they were changing their way of rating other states. Forbes, a lot of these rankings, by the way, are coming from the business press, not from liberal think tanks. They're coming from the business press. Forbes magazine, I mean, that's a voice for capitalism, ranked us 13th best in the nation. So we're doing at least as well as the low-tax states in business, but the quality of life is so much better. It's a win-win situation.
No question.
And
a plug for Egan.
Right.
We in one of the national magazines, it might have been Money, rated Egan number 5 as the best among the best 50 small cities in the country to live in.
I can believe it. Egan is a great place to live. Great parks, great schools, just all the good stuff
55
that Minnesota's
lakes.
famous for. 55 lakes. But here's some more. Again, for 30 years we've been hearing that the high taxes and the relatively high investment. Oh, by the way, Minnesota is not a high tax state if you're in the middle income. You pay about average or a little bit less than average in taxes if you're a middle income person.
It's not that much higher if you're in the upper income. It is
no,
higher, but not.
Lots of wealthy people are happy to pay their taxes here. But anyway, here's the proof in the pudding. For 30 years, we're supposed to be bad for business. People are supposed to have been fleeing all this time. On millionaires per capita, I just looked this up. Minnesota ranks the last few years somewhere between 10th, 12th, 13th. Texas is in the 20s. Arizona's in the 30s, and so is Florida. So we are way out front of them in millionaires per capita. You already mentioned the Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah.
We're second in Fortune 500 companies per capita, and the only state higher is another high-tax state, Connecticut. So
I thought it was Delaware. It's Connecticut.
Yeah. And similarly, California is a high-tax state. That is the engine of the American economy.
Right.
So this notion that high taxes, there's no question in my mind that there are dozens, probably hundreds, maybe even a couple thousand people a year who decide they're spending half their time in Florida. They might as well change their residence, and they'll enjoy a tax break. But I think that number is limited. This recent report that alleges wealth migration pointed out a net migration of about, I think, 5,000 a year most recently. That is a small fraction of 1% of our 2.7 million tax filers, and tens of thousands of people, high income, have moved to Minnesota.
Right. That's what I was just
It's a
going
net.
to say.
It's a net thing. I think we should pay attention to it. I think we should watch it. We should market to our older, affluent people that this state was recently ranked by AARP as the best state to retire in. Get that.
Well, you know why? Because when the weather gets that cold, it freezes your brain. And you have the opportunity, as we do here, to have a longer life, and you have all your faculties still with you. If you're down in Alabama, And I don't want to pick on Alabama,
You're
so
more
let
likely
me
to
say
get sick.
Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, et cetera.
The germs aren't killed by
That's
the weather.
it.
Right. Well,
That's it.
of course, we are second, I think, in longevity, or first or second, year in and year out. Our health indicators were number one. The biggest concern are these racial disparities, and the way we approach that, and leaders of communities of color, people of integrity, intelligence, who know what's best for their communities, are not calling for cutting taxes on the wealthy. That is not their solution to their economic situation.
And we know all these calls about cutting taxes, and the trickle-down theory is a fiction that was disproved 20 years ago, and yet in the mind of certainly the right wing, they just continue it. But then,
Well,
somebody would vote 58 times to do away with the Affordable Care Act. You don't have much hope for their intellect.
Let's acknowledge that there is a point at which taxes would be too high. The United States and Minnesota actually have relatively low taxes compared to the rest of the industrialized world. All the other OECD nations were actually on the low end. But let's acknowledge that there's some level at which taxes would discourage incentive. But this argument that if you cut taxes, business will just cause and effect shoot up has been disproven by Kansas, by Wisconsin, some other states our size that have cut big taxes. When we cut taxes in the early 2000s, late 1990s, we had a decade of really weak growth. Our worst decade economically was right after we cut taxes, and that was true of the nation as well.
And
So-
look what happened to Kansas when Brownback cut the taxes with his legislature.
Right.
Kansas is a state that is really in fiscal problems today.
Right, they
Fiscal
have both
trouble.
fiscal problems, because if you cut taxes, you have less revenue for public services, and you don't get the payoff in economic growth. And actually, there's a lot of studies that show if you cut taxes on wealthy folks, they don't necessarily invest it in new jobs and higher pay for their employees. I mean, think about it. You keep it. And
Pretty
there's a
much,
new
that's what
reports out
happens.
this week. This is the news of the week about the trillions of dollars and the 20s of trillions that is being socked away in offshore tax havens. Panama is the latest. Watch for more on this. A lot of this wealth is not being reinvested.
What is known as the
but
Panama Papers,
It's
right.
basically being hidden and hoarded in offshore places.
The same goes for the companies, the corporations that are moving their headquarters offshore to
Right.
evade paying taxes.
Right.
And yet they want to make their money here, they want to sell their products here, but then they don't want to pick up the fair share of the cost. General Electric is one that Sanders just talked about,
Right.
and there are several others.
Right, and the president has talked about these inversions, where companies who are not doing much business in a country will actually locate their headquarters there and claim that that's where their income is coming from. Perfectly legal. We got to change the laws. Yes, absolutely. So I really think the bottom line for Minnesota is to keep in mind this tradition that was actually established by progressive Republicans over a century ago, that we would raise the revenue we needed for good public stuff: schools, parks, hospitals, public improvements, transportation, the infrastructure that really makes capitalism thrive.
And those people had the vision to see that.
Absolutely, they did, and they were the people who really these progressive Republicans 100 years ago, people like the Pillsburys and other capitalists understood that being kind of the end of the line in a cold state, that they had to build amenities and had to build good, solid public infrastructure
these
in
are
order to
people
compete.
who would be drummed out of the Republican Party today for those same ideas, but look what it has created, and you shouldn't have to go any further than that.
Right.
Look at this state and look at all the benefits that we have here.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have left, but I just...
3 minutes.
I just printed up page after page of something off the City of Minneapolis's website. It's called Accolades. And they actually keep close track of every magazine, every website, every organization that does a state ranking. And we're talking hundreds of entries here over the
Well,
last
that's
2
terrific.
years.
That's available on the City of
It's-
Minneapolis's
The
website.
City of Minneapolis's website.
Accolades.
And it's called Accolades. And a lot of it is just plain fun. Minneapolis ranks sixth best city to celebrate New Year's Eve. I mean, who knew? Actually, Minneapolis and St. Paul were recently ranked very high, both in the top 5, as the most romantic cities in America. I mean,
Could have fooled me.
really, what would we know?
We're probably ranked very high in these local breweries also. I don't think anybody has come close to that.
Actually, we're among the top 5 in brewery and beer cities. We're in the top 5. Biking, way up there. Every poll of biking, pedestrian-friendly stuff, we're beginning to dominate those rankings. Among the top for LGBT equality. This is an economic asset. Gay and lesbian folks know that this is a refuge and a place where they can flourish. We need their talent. I mentioned AARP ranking us number 1 as a place to retire because of our good services, good senior centers, just a good place to spend your retirement years.
And when I get up to retirement age, I'm going to consider that.
Best state fair in America, 3rd best state for teachers, 15th best American Children's Museum, 6th fairest tax system. How about that? 10th richest state in America, 9th best sports city for fans. You and I might not agree with all these stadiums we built, but
I was going to say, the great sports city.
All this-
It would be nice to have a baseball team that could win a game and
right.
and not be subsidized. These large stadiums.
3rd friendliest city, Twin Cities' 3rd friendliest area in America. Of course, everybody's so happy. 8th best school system in America, Minnesota overall, 8th best for school systems. I recently, by the way, looked up how Minnesota compared with Texas on overall quality of schools, top to bottom, Education Week, nonpartisan, non-ideological organization. Minnesota ranked around 10th. We should do better than that. Texas was, care to guess?
Now,
42nd.
50. Oh, 42nd.
Yeah.
And we are
We can go
also
on.
the best program that's going to go off the air in 3 seconds.
All
Dane
right.
Smith, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. Great to see you again.